Hi, good evening, everyone. As she said, my name is Dr. Amy Rosenbluth. I'm at Stony Brook right now, and this is a study that was done while I was a fellow at UT Southwestern, survey of the 2020 Fellowship Council application and match process and the impact of COVID-19. And I have nothing to disclose. 80% of surgical residents are pursuing fellowships, and they are spending $8,000 and missing a week of work for the interview season. With an average PGY4 salary of less than $65,000, that means that they're spending almost 13% of their annual income to apply for fellowship. In addition, there's putting a strain on the residencies for coverage and following ACGME rules. Programs are also feeling a pinch. It's been found that in general surgery residencies, each candidate interviewed costs about $12,000. In the spring of 2018 at the Fellowship Council retreat, they discussed the need for interview reform. The aim of this study was to evaluate the Fellowship Council's current interview process formats and see if there were any areas where we could reform those. We planned the study in the fall of 2019. The plan was to distribute surveys to both applicants and program directors after rank lists were submitted. However, COVID-19 dramatically altered interviews that year, and mid-cycle of the interview season, things began shutting down. Some programs had already completed all of their in-person interviews, and some had yet to start any interviews. We adjusted our surveys at that time to evaluate these changes in real time. The completed surveys and study plans were submitted and approved by the UT Southwestern IRB as well as by the Fellowship Council, and then they were distributed by the Fellowship Council after rank list submission. Applicant and program survey questions involved questions regarding the volume of programs applied to or applications received, interviews offered and accepted, programs and applicants ranked, initial plans for interview formats, how many interviews needed to be changed and what those formats were changed to, how helpful they felt those interviews were in their decision making. We evaluated the predicted versus actual cost of the interview season last year. And finally, we asked for preferences for future interview formats and any comments they may have had on their experience. Our response rate from applicants was 53%. Applicants submitted about 28 applications to at least 2 subgroups of fellowship programs. They received offers from roughly a third of the programs that they were applying to. They generally accepted, interviewed, and ranked any program that offered them an interview. Only 30% of planned in-person interviews were completed, and nearly 30% of applicants completed no in-person interviews whatsoever. About 3/4 of all planned interviews that these applicants had were changed due to COVID-19. When asked about expenditures, applicants had planned to spend roughly $5,000 and missed 10 days of work, which we do think was an underestimate based on other data. They reported actually spending roughly $1,000 and missing 3 days of work. This expenditure could be accounted for the few in-person interviews that they were able to complete. We had a program response rate of 38% of certified programs. The programs tended to offer about 20 interviews, interview 16 applicants, and rank 14 applicants. We were also able to break this information down by program subgroup type, and while there is slight variation within them, what we did notice was that all of the subgroups are very competitive. We did include flexible endoscopy and hepatobiliary within this. However, we only got one response from each program, and therefore they were left out. 93% of programs initially planned in-person interviews. 15% were planned to be in-person at a central location like SAGES. However, all centralized interviews were canceled as national meetings were made virtual. Approximately 3/4 of all programs completed virtual-only interviews, and 1/4% of programs were able to complete all of their interviews in person prior to things being shut down. For resources utilized when planning in-person interviews, most programs thought that they would be spending 48 in-person hours. When virtual interviews were done, it was more like 24 in-person hours as compared to the 48 for in-person central interviews. When asked for comments, in general, most applicants acknowledged that the changes in the interview season resulted in a significant amount of time and money saved, but they felt that the cost was sacrificing evaluating the intangibles that they may see by faculty-to-faculty interaction or information that they might glean from other residents on the interview trail. They noted that virtual interviews, if they were to continue, it would be significantly more helpful if they were on consistent formats or platforms across programs. Many liked the idea of having a virtual pre-interview that would be followed by a later in-person or virtual interview, if they were still interested. However, they noted there was a significant concern for ranking bias there, as programs may feel that people who came to the program to interview in person would have made more of an effort, rather than it being related to time or means. Programs in general had very similar opinions regarding the intangibles gathered from an in-person interview, but acknowledged they could save significant time and money with virtual interviews. Where applicants were more concerned about bias, programs were concerned that the ease of virtual interviews would cause an increase in applications received by less interested candidates. 3/4 of the applicants say they were able to attain enough information from the virtual interviews to build a rank list, and 84% of programs agreed with that sentiment. When asked about their feelings for future interview formats, the most popular option among applicants were virtual pre-interviews with later in-person interviews. This choice was followed by virtual-only interviews. Programs also favored virtual pre-interviews with later in-person interviews, followed by the second choice of a return to in-person on-site interviews, with virtual-only interviews being the third most popular choice. Overall, our study did indicate that although the cycle's virtual interview process had to be quickly created from scratch, it was incredibly successful. Both programs and applicants felt they could glean sufficient information from the virtual format to make their rank lists, while saving both time and money. Given that this was the first year the Fellowship Council undertook this new interview platform, and given the short time with which each individual program had to make a plan, it's likely that going forward this could lead to lasting interview reforms. Thank you, and I'll take any questions.